In this thrilling twist on the classic romance story, I find myself trapped in the role of the villain. Despite my best efforts to be the perfect partner, to give her everything she wanted, it seems like fate had other plans. But what happens when the heroine decides to rewrite the script and take control of her own story? Watch as the plot takes unexpected turns, challenging the very essence of love, destiny, and the battle between good and evil. Join me on this emotional journey as I try to figure out how to change the narrative and possibly even my own fate. Will love triumph, or will the villain be doomed forever? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting twists. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode in this unpredictable journey.
I transmigrated into a sweet romance story. As the villainous male supporting character, I accompanied the female lead through her toughest days. From obscurity to becoming a renowned and aloof movie queen, I exhausted all my energy and resources for her. Yet, I knew that Victoria had someone in her heart that she could never forget. I was also aware that the supporting male character in a sweet romance story is merely there to add highlights to the protagonist's love story. What I didn't expect was that Victoria would tell me that if her life were a script, she would tear it apart and rewrite a story just for us. Victoria was trending again. As a top-tier celebrity, trending wasn't particularly surprising. But this time, she was trending alongside her senior colleague Ethan. In her 5-year career, she had been like a shooting star, dazzling on stage and mesmerizing on screen. Despite her youth, she had already won the Best Actress award, and there had never been any scandalous rumors about her. One of her most famous photos was taken just as she stepped off a stage where she had captivated everyone's attention. Her gown trailed on the floor, fans screamed, and light shone on half of her face, with beads of sweat trickling down her pale neck. She exuded a charm that captivated the soul, while the other half of her face, shrouded in shadow, conveyed a cold indifference, like an untouchable goddess. She was the most brilliant light in the room. They said Victoria was like the brightest star in the North Pole, unreachable and untouchable, her beauty and coldness leaving an overwhelming impression. The trending topic featuring Victoria and Ethan had a red explosive sign next to it. It was a video from a press conference where Victoria, for the first time, chose a historical drama My Emperor's Command over a blockbuster, co-starring with Ethan. In the video, a reporter asked Victoria which line from the drama she liked the most. She smiled gently, portraying a female general who devoted everything to the emperor, the male lead. The trend of strong female characters was in vogue. Victoria turned her head, looking up at Ethan, who was taller than her. She took a small step and curtsied, just like her character who was always loyal to the emperor. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with love as she said, "Victoria wishes to be the brightest gem in your crown, to expand your territories and spread your fame, to accompany you like a willow by the riverbank, and for my name to be remembered in history alongside yours. Victoria offers everything to you, my emperor." The room fell silent. Ethan reached out and tucked her hair behind her ear with a smile. Their eyes met, and the moment was filled with tenderness. The crowd erupted in screams and the flashlights flickered. The video ended, and the comment section exploded. Even Victoria's fans began celebrating. Wasn't this love? The confident emperor and the valiant female general, who wouldn't be entranced by this? Victoria's gaze, wasn't that admiration? After all these years, she finally had a crush. I unconsciously rubbed the screen, where Victoria's eyes sparkled like a galaxy, a look I had never seen before. I sighed helplessly and leaned back, pinching the bridge of my nose. Finally, the day had come. I had transmigrated into the story when I was 15, in my sophomore year of high school. It was a sweet romance story, with Victoria as the undisputed top-tier celebrity and rising movie queen. She was aloof and distant, but showed rare tenderness only to the male lead, Ethan. They had known each other since high school. Victoria came from a wealthy family, while Ethan was a handsome transfer student. According to the plot, Victoria's family would face a major downfall in their senior year, dropping her from high society into the dirt. Ethan would rescue her from her despair, preventing her from turning dark. Later, due to various reasons including Ethan's study abroad, they would reunite years later and bloom together in the entertainment industry, with their love receiving everyone's attention and blessings. But after I transmigrated, Ethan left much earlier than in the original plot. He left while Victoria was still unsure of her feelings for him, missing the downfall of the Victoria family and thus never rescuing her. I was the one who held that 18-year-old girl who lost her parents overnight, supporting her through those dark times. She was never so helpless, crying silently in my arms like clinging to her last hope. Later, I protected her as she returned to the spotlight once more. She was always destined for greatness. She was discovered by the entertainment industry, starred in films, and released albums. I attended the premiere of her first movie, watching her struggle in the rain on screen, her eyes cold as snow. The audience around me gasped in awe. Proudly, I called her after her red carpet walk and said, "Victoria, I saw it." I also attended her first concert, sitting in the middle of the audience as the crowd cheered and screamed for her, countless LED lights illuminating in her honor. They chanted Victoria's name. At that moment, I knew she would never be my girl. I was lost in the crowd, smiling as I watched her shine brightly on stage, yet my heart was filled with bitterness and helplessness. I had accompanied her through the toughest days, but I also knew that her brilliant future did not belong to me. Victoria might not know that the original novel for the drama Ethan starred in was written by me. However, the genuine emotions I poured into my writing had to be relayed to Ethan by Victoria. "I am willing to be your sharpest sword, Your Majesty. My heart is dedicated to the vast lands and rivers. I realized countless times that no matter how long I stayed with Victoria, this dazzling girl would never belong to me. But I didn't ask for much. I just hoped she would be happy and well. I told myself, the time for the supporting male character has come. Let go of the glory that doesn't belong to you." I slowly drank a bowl of porridge, stared at the freesia on the windowsill for a while, and then went back to my room to pack everything. I didn't have much stuff. It all fit neatly into a small suitcase. I called Victoria's phone several times. On the third attempt, someone finally answered. It was Victoria's assistant. She said, "Sin, Victoria is changing costumes right now." Before she could finish, the phone was hastily taken away. Victoria's distant voice came through. She said, "Is it sincere? Give it to me." She walked out while talking. The noise faded away. She said, "Hello, Sin, what's up?" It didn't seem like a big deal at first, but her clear voice inevitably made my heart ache. I looked up, reminiscing about the 10 years we had spent together, scenes fading and surging back like tides. However, the long paragraph she had just said to Ethan echoed in my mind. Everything we had gone through seemed unchangeable, like fate. So I thought for a moment and said, "Victoria, I'm leaving." She paused and then casually said, "Sin, are you going out to relax? Are you going abroad or staying in the country? Are you leaving in a few days? You can talk to Miss Sun. She often books tickets. But can you wait a couple of days? I want my manager to reschedule my work. I also want to go with you. I heard there's a place with beautiful scenery." The noise around her gradually grew louder. Someone was calling her, "Miss Victoria, it's time to start filming." She ignored it. I interrupted her rambling, enunciating each word. "It's not like that. I'm leaving you." I tried my best to sound like I was saying goodbye to an old friend. "Victoria, goodbye." There was a brief silence and I hung up the phone. I was a little worried. I was worried she would hear the unrest in my voice, and I was also worried she would say, "Okay," with relief. This small apartment was one I bought before Victoria became famous. At that time, I saved up a modest amount of royalties and made a down payment for a 2-bedroom apartment. We each had a small room. Later, when she became famous, this place was no longer suitable for her. There were too many people, and the paparazzi could easily follow her. Her manager wouldn't allow her to be seen living with someone during her rise to fame. I repeatedly explained to her that we were just family, but I knew there was nothing I could do. I had briefly owned the fiery starlight, but I was acutely aware that she never belonged to me. She moved to a more secluded residential area, and her schedule became busier every day. She would always call me to talk about her new scripts and new dances, but she was too busy. Eventually, when I called her, she was always at events, filming, or preparing for a performance. She would call me back, exhausted. I felt sorry for her being so tired, so later I stopped calling her. I didn't have many friends here. After work at the publishing house, I would come home and write. When I wrote The Emperor's Order, I gave a line to the female general. She would return in the midst of a snowstorm, with a vast royal city and thousands of soldiers behind her. She would dismount and salute the young king, saying, "I am willing to be your sharpest sword, to cut through thorns for you. I am willing to be your strongest shield, to protect you from the wind and rain." When I wrote that line, it was actually my own inner monologue. I wanted to be Victoria's sword and shield, but I could do nothing. All I could give was a hug. According to the plot, Victoria met Ethan and other boys when they came to the company for an interview. They reunited after a long time. The book described their encounter as she walked past Ethan with a light step, without showing any emotion, as if they were strangers. But in fact, she was full of joy, her heart racing. So, to be closer to the one she loved, she took the role of the female supporting character in the drama Ethan was in. The always cold and aloof Victoria was so bold and proactive for the first time, just to get closer to her beloved. This press conference was the beginning of their sweet and ambiguous romance. I had accompanied her for so many years, and finally, the protagonist appeared. I finished some work in this small apartment, packed my suitcase, and dragged it to the door. Just as I opened the door, I realized it was raining. The rain was heavy, hitting the heart with a dull ache. I was about to close the door and get an umbrella when I saw a fair hand on the door frame. The hand was slender, with a beautiful silver iris ring on the middle finger. I opened the door and sighed deeply. Victoria stood at the door, drenched in the rain, her wet bangs clinging to her delicate eyebrows and eyes. The captivating light in Victoria's peach blossom eyes dimmed halfway, revealing a hint of red. She was still wearing her costume from the set, with the wide sleeves hastily bundled up. Raindrops trickled down her delicate nose, making it seem as though she was crying. She must have rushed over, as she was still slightly out of breath, her red lips pressed into a pale line, carrying an air of unease. This was a stark contrast to her usual cold demeanor, making her look like a child about to be abandoned. She stubbornly looked at me, her voice hoarse, calling my name. "Sincere, where are you going?" Raindrops rolled down from her jawline to her neck, disappearing into the semi-wet collar of her costume. I paused and asked, "Did you run away from the set?" She interrupted me, looking up at me and asking again, "Where are you going?" I rubbed my temples and said, "I'm going back to San Francisco. It's too noisy here. I don't belong in this place anymore. I want to set off fireworks on the beach at night in San Francisco and have the old wontons from the shop downstairs." Her hand, gripping the door frame, trembled slightly. She asked softly, "What about me?" I saw people moving in the hallway. She was such a well-known star, and I worried about her being photographed by the paparazzi or passers-by. I sighed and slightly turned to the side, signaling her to come in. Although she hadn't stayed here for a long time, her room and wardrobe were still there. I urged her to take a hot shower. She hesitated, looking at me several times. I found it both amusing and frustrating. "I won't leave while you're in the shower," I reassured her. Only then did she nod. Her phone was on silent, but missed calls and WeChat messages kept popping up. Victoria glanced at it and then flipped the phone over on the coffee table before heading to the bathroom with her clothes. I received a call from her assistant, who sounded frantic, asking if Victoria was with me. I gave a light and told them not to worry, that she would be back soon. The assistant was relieved and called her manager to handle any potential sightings of Victoria on the way over. All this only took a little while. I rarely lost focus, but Victoria was very serious about her acting career. Despite being a top star, She never acted like a diva. I accidentally played one of Victoria's new songs. Her voice in the recording was tender and affectionate, like a confession from the stars. She sang, "You are my silent reliance, yet I feel no difference. My all is crowned for you, unknown is the heart that lightens your burden." My heart felt warm, but the comments rolling by read, "Ethan must have helped Victoria get the lead role, right? The most touching love is the one endured in silence, family." Reflecting on my brief moment of self-indulgence, I felt quite embarrassed. But according to the original storyline, it was supposed to be like this. She wrote songs for him, devoted everything to him, unknowingly giving him the best of herself. If her high school love was as scorching as the sun, then after all the hardships, this love became deeper and more hidden, like the shimmering sea under the moonlight. Anyone would naturally fall for Victoria because she was just so adorable. The song was gentle, like she was softly singing in my ear. I lost myself in it until I heard the sound of Victoria coming out. I instinctively looked up and hastily paused the song, feeling like I was caught in the act. Victoria had changed into a white silk blouse, her collarbone peeking out halfway. Her hair was half dried, and the shower seemed to have soothed her somewhat. Her usual charm was slightly evident again. Hearing the familiar melody, she paused and smiled. "Like a little fox. Listening to my new song?" she asked. I nodded. "It's pretty good." She didn't say anything, her ears turning a bit red, and she responded with a nonchalant, The atmosphere turned awkward, and I didn't know what to say. With only a few hours left before my train, I had to say goodbye. "Next time, don't run off without saying anything." They were all really worried, I advised. Victoria, who usually hated being lectured, listened quietly this time.
"I've already bought my ticket."
"It's raining outside, so you don't need to see me off. If you ever think of me, you can come to San Francisco for a beer," I said. It turns out that farewells aren't tear-filled, but rather a restrained effort to maintain the dignity of friendship. She stayed silent for a long time. I sighed, stood up, and prepared to leave. But as I passed her, she grabbed my sleeve. "I won't look for you to drink. I won't just occasionally pass by San Francisco," she said, looking up at me stubbornly, her eyes slightly red. For a moment I thought she might cry. After all these years and the hardships she'd faced, she had only ever cried silently in my arms on the afternoon she lost her parents. I bent down slightly and said gently, "Victoria, have you ever thought that you might just be used to my company? Back then, you would have accepted anyone who came to comfort you." She froze, her face turning pale as if she had been insulted. "Sincere, do you even have a heart? It could only be you. It will always be you," she said, almost through gritted teeth. At that awkward moment, my phone rang. Somehow, the ringtone had changed to Victoria's new song, and the chorus played, "My all is crowned for you. Unknown is the heart that lightens your burden." I felt embarrassed as Victoria kept holding on to me. I rolled up my sleeves and answered the phone with my other hand. The caller was from the production team of The Emperor's Command. They had just announced the cast and held a press conference a while ago, and now they had probably already filmed a small part of it. They wanted me to join the team to oversee the storyline and work with the screenwriters to refine and revise the plot. I hesitated because if I joined the team, I would likely run into Victoria and Ethan quite often. Just as I was thinking of declining, the voice on the other end politely said, "We all hope to present your work in the best possible way to the audience, so we sincerely hope you can participate." In the end, I nodded. Suddenly, I remembered that Victoria didn't know I wrote this novel. When I looked down, I saw her thin lips curling into a smile. She rested her chin in her hand, looking relaxed, her delicate eyes sparkling without a hint of surprise. I raised my voice and said, "You wouldn't happen to know that I wrote The Emperor's Command, would you?" Her eyebrows arched. She curled her legs and nestled into the sofa, tilting her head slightly, and said arrogantly, "Mr. S, please guide me well." It was just like that summer when she sat by the window amidst the cicadas' chorus, her youthful profile full of emotion. She smiled and said, "It's sincere, please guide me well." She always did that, never really needing my help. I instructed Victoria to keep her distance from me on the set, as if we didn't know each other. She reluctantly agreed with a soft, "Oh, the Emperor's command primarily tells the story of an emperor's rise from prince to ruler of the world." Ethan played the protagonist, Phoenix. The female lead was the Prime Minister's childhood sweetheart. The second lead was a princess from an enemy country. And the third female character, a female general, was played by Victoria. Her role wasn't very significant, seemingly more like a supporting role for Ethan. The production team arranged a room for me at a nearby hotel. As I was leaving my room after unpacking, I ran into Sophia, who played the female lead. She had entered the entertainment industry during college and continued on that path after graduation, now having both talent and a good reputation. Coincidentally, she was also a classmate from my college department. Back then, due to some roommates teasing, there was a rumor, sincere and 3 peaks soar to the clouds, Sophia guards the mountaintop, which caused quite a few misunderstandings between us during college. Sophia wore a mask, revealing her intelligent black eyes. She recognized me after a brief pause, probably because her manager had mentioned me. She quickly responded with a smile behind her mask and said, "So it really is you. Long time no see, sincere." I replied, "Yes, it's been a while." It happened to be the afternoon when the cast had a script reading session where the main actors would read through the script and test the emotions before shooting. She looked at me and said, "Perfect timing, let's go together." I had no reason to refuse and nodded. In college, Sophia and I had a distant but polite relationship. She had a warm and appropriate way of speaking, so reconnecting now was not particularly awkward. When we entered the room, most people were already there. However, it was easy to spot Victoria lazily curled up in a corner. She wore a black lace top, pressing the script with one hand. Her gaze first fell on me and then glanced at Sophia beside me, her mouth forming a slight pout, looking upset. Once everyone had arrived, we introduced our roles. I hadn't seen Ethan in a long time. He looked even more refined and amiable than in his photos online. When our eyes met, he smiled slightly without any surprise. A typical friendly demeanor. We went through the lines, and it was Victoria's turn to act out the scene where Melody and Phoenix meet for the first time. Melody had a tragic background, fighting for food with beggars and competing with sparrows for grains as a child, until the protagonist appeared, a ray of light in her hopeless life. This scene depicted Melody as a teenager, beaten by a shopkeeper for stealing bread, lying wounded in the rain, when she saw the protagonist's luxurious carriage passing by. Victoria quickly got into character. Although she was still wearing her black lace top and holding the script, her expression was exactly like that of a girl about to die hopelessly in the rain. She shivered from the cold, struggling to keep her eyes open, afraid that closing them would turn her into a corpse by the roadside. Ethan read his lines, calling his guard's name, lazily leaning against the chair back like the pampered young prince. He said, "Zihan, why isn't the carriage moving?" It was Melody lying in the mud, blocking the noble's carriage. Just as the coachman's whip was about to strike Melody, Phoenix lifted the heavy purple curtain and looked down, lightly stopping him. Ethan read the prince's lines in an indifferent tone. "Forget it, it's just a beggar. Find someone to take her to get treated and leave some money." Melody, battered by the rain, could barely keep her eyes open. All she could see was a corner of the grand, luxurious carriage curtain, with opulence inside that the rain couldn't penetrate. The noble prince slightly leaned out, giving her a lifeline with little effort. Lying in the mud, covered in wounds, Melody, afraid that this dream in the rain would shatter, boldly asked, "Who are you?" The young man laughed lightly, with a hint of disdain and incredulity, but said nothing. The heavy purple curtain fell shut once more. This was their first encounter, a dream Melody could never forget. As Victoria leaned back, she returned to being that cold, distant girl. Suddenly, Victoria spoke up. "There's something I don't understand. Even if Phoenix reached out to her in her most desperate moment and gave her a few dollars, Melody might be grateful and repay him with her life. But she would never fall hopelessly in love with him. I looked at her. Our gazes met for a second. Victoria leaned forward and whispered, "Unless what he gave was a warm embrace in the middle of a storm, an embrace that could fend off all the coldness." Victoria was so certain, as if in that moment she had become Melody. She was utterly convinced. I was taken aback, memories flooding back. I composed myself and said, "But that's impossible. Phoenix's character at this point is a prince. He has compassion for the common folk, but he would never embrace a muddy, near-death stranger." Victoria's eyes were dark, with tiny sparkles swirling in them, like stars reflected in the night sky. Suddenly, Ethan spoke up. "But if it were a servant, that would be different, wouldn't it? If Phoenix's servant gave the embrace on his behalf, it would make sense. But why would a servant embrace a dying beggar?" Victoria closed her eyes, pursed her thin lips, and said softly, "Who knows? Maybe it was out of pity." I stared at her blankly, suddenly recalling the year when the Liu family fell from grace. The high and mighty girl was suddenly brought down to the ground, losing her parents and relatives overnight. The flowers she held were scattered in the wind. I slowly approached her and gently embraced the desperate, sorrowful girl. Did she think it was pity? I never got an answer, but that part of the scene was slightly altered. In the rain, the melody played by Victoria received a misplaced embrace. After the read-through session, I returned to the hotel. Passing by the fire escape, someone gently tugged at my sleeve, pulling me into the dark. The door was half open, letting in a sliver of light. I looked at the girl in front of me. Victoria was pressed against me in the cramped space. I could only breathe in her snowy scent. I lowered my head, puzzled, and asked, "What are you doing?" She looked up slightly, a hint of a smile in her almond-shaped eyes, and said, "You said I have to pretend not to know you in front of others. I can only talk to you here, right?" I awkwardly moved back, raising my head to appear more confident, inadvertently brushing my chin against her forehead. The warm touch was fleeting. After a moment of silence, I asked, "So what is it?" Just then, someone walked by in the hallway. It seemed to be her assistant looking for her, mumbling, "Vicky was here just a moment ago. Where did she go?" I turned back to her, meeting her dark eyes. The faint smile she had was gone. The light from the half-open fire escape door faintly illuminated her face, making her even more captivating. She licked her lips, propped one hand against the wall, and stood on tiptoe, barely reaching my lip level. She bit her lip several times before speaking. If I didn't know her, I would have thought she was nervous. No matter how big the stage or the occasion, Victoria never got stage fright. Yet here, in this silent, confined space with no audience, she seemed to be searching for the right words. She softly asked, "Who would be willing to give a hug to someone who has fallen into the abyss?" I looked at her downcast almond eyes, unsure if she was referring to Melody in the script or the real Victoria. When Victoria was 18, her life was not filled with a grand birthday party like a princess. First, Ethan silently left the country, making the flowers she held to confess her feelings useless. Then, the Liu family went bankrupt. Her father committed suicide in prison, and her mother couldn't bear the shock and fell ill and died. Overnight, she went from a celebrated girl to a broken family. I searched all over the city and found her in an old alley. She was leaning against a dilapidated concrete wall, the setting sun falling. The freshly picked flowers were scattered on the ground. Though I had found her, I didn't know if I should approach her. I was not Ethan. To her, I was just someone she knew by name. Who would want their vulnerable, downtrodden state exposed to a mere acquaintance? What was I thinking back then? I was just filled with sorrow looking at her, thinking she might need a hug. I had nothing else to offer, but I had a hug. I slowly walked over. She leaned against the wall, glaring at me fiercely, but her eyes were red. When she saw it was me, she froze, silently lowering her gaze to the flowers on the ground. My heart ached. I thought she would tell me to go away, but she just bit her lip like an injured kitten. She turned her face away, covering her eyes with her hand. I saw tears seeping through her fingers. The proud girl was as fragile as snow under the sunset. At that moment, the setting sun sank into my heart. I had never been so brave. I took a step forward and gently hugged her. Silently, I thought, "Don't be sad. I will always be with you. Always, always with you." Now, 25-year-old Victoria asked me, who would hug someone who has fallen into the abyss? My palms were sweaty. I lowered my eyes and said, "I don't know." Victoria stepped closer, her eyes cold and lips biting. "You don't know? Then let me tell you. Do you know what compassion is?" Sincere saw Melody, covered in mud and barely surviving. To show compassion, some would give money, others would offer a hug. "What about you? What do you think?" I was stunned. She gently leaned in, as if sighing, as if pleading. The light fell into her eyes. She said, "In tomorrow's scene where Melody first meets Phoenix, the script was changed last minute. We haven't found the right actor to hug Melody. It's just a few seconds on screen. Will you act it out with me? I need you. No one else will do." I seriously studied her eyes, noticing a hint of madness in their beauty. She pleaded, "Just pretend it's the last time you'll accompany me." I thought, "All right, I'll accompany you one last time." I softly said, "Okay." She was so close that her breath filled the space between us. My heart felt like it was buried under snow, cold to the bone yet still moved by her. I walked out and she didn't stop me. Just as I was about to reach the door, she suddenly called out to me. I turned my head. Victoria stood in the light and shadow, looking at me quietly. She said, "Sincere," and I expected her to say something more, but she just softly said, "Good night." As I exited through the fire escape, I looked around like a guilty husband. Victoria let out a light laugh from behind. The next day, in the scene where Melody first meets Phoenix, it really started to rain. Because of my unexpected role, the director had Ethan's makeup artist also do mine. Ethan had a private dressing room. Just as I was about to knock on the door, I heard my name mentioned inside. My hand paused mid-air. Inside, Ethan's assistant asked, "Bro, why did you suggest giving him your role? This character's appearance is so random." Ethan chuckled ambiguously. "You think it was my idea?" "It was Victoria's." He paused and then continued, "Doesn't matter. It's a role that doesn't even count as a supporting character. Adding or removing him won't affect anything. It's just to make him understand what being a minor character is like." I forced a bitter smile and withdrew my hand. Turning around, I saw Sophia standing behind me, likely having heard everything. I waved my hand and mouthed, "I'll wait to go in." Sophia couldn't help but smile a little. She softly said, "Being talked about behind your back and still so composed, Mr. S." I shook my head and said, "No, I'm not composed." He was telling the truth. Inside or outside the scene, I'm just a character that doesn't even count as a supporting role. When filming started, it really poured. The crew didn't need to worry about additional effects. I played a servant. As the carriage moved forward in the rain, it encountered an obstacle, a dying girl lying in the mud. I got up and lifted the curtain for Phoenix to look. The carriage was close to the girl in the mud. From my angle, I could see the rain pooling in the dimples beside her high nose. The rain-soaked road was muddy and hard to traverse. The girl, dirty and broken, curled up slightly in the cold, wet mud. Blood seemed to spread faintly around her. A long time ago, a harsh critic described her as brimming with spirit. As someone with no acting experience, Victoria pulled me into the scene instantly. She was the most desperate girl, a beggar only pitied by the rootless rain in this world. Melody's eyelids fluttered slightly. The rain hit her wounds and her eyes. Her face was deathly pale, yet she still struggled to lift her gaze, looking at me through the heavy rain. I even thought I saw a hint of yellow in her eyes. Behind her was only the falling rain. She was a beggar, a child abandoned by the heavens, having nothing. Phoenix's voice came from behind. "What's wrong, Ethan?" I snapped out of the shock from her gaze and replied, "A dying beggar is blocking the way. The carriage can't move." Melody's black hair mingled with the mud. She looked up at the carriage that shouldn't have opened its curtain for her, curling her hands in embarrassment. She tried to stand, but her legs were broken. She could only crawl bit by bit to the side of the road, falling into the mud without a sound, rain pounding her body. That moment hit me like nothing before. I understood why the servant was willing to give her a hug, who, in their downfall, still preserved a shred of pride and dignity. Anyone who saw her would be moved. I thought of Victoria at 18, after her family's downfall. Flowers no longer stayed for her, malice covered her. After that hug, I didn't see her for a long time. The first time I found her was at dusk. They said her family left many debts. Victoria lived a hard life. In novels, it was just a few lines, but seeing it with my own eyes, it was many days and nights of a once proud girl's life. The first time I heard Victoria's humble cries, she was kneeling and begging. The debt collectors were cruel, harassing a young girl. They even hired thugs to follow her daily. I showed up a step ahead of her every day and drove those thugs away. Until one day, I didn't win. Holding onto the wall, I stood up and walked out, only to find Victoria standing in the shadow just a wall away. I didn't know how long she had been there, watching me cry silently. The sky outside was beautiful, with the sunset filling the horizon. She handed me a Band-Aid, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and then turned to leave. I followed her at a distance, not too far, not too close, walking slowly through the bustling crowd. The long street was shrouded in twilight, and gradually the people thinned out. She stopped and after a long while turned to look at me directly. She stared at the bruises on my brow and lips, and with a stubborn look asked, "How long have you been following me? How long are you going to watch me make a fool of myself?" I lifted my head and said, "I just want to keep you company." She pulled the corners of her mouth and said coldly, "I don't need it. Do you understand, Sincere?" I sighed and turned my head away. I knew she didn't need my company, but what else could I do? It seemed like there was nothing I could do. Then she suddenly softened her voice and said, "Don't mind me, Sincere, just go." In that moment, Victoria seemed to merge with Melody, standing in the rain and mud in front of me. I got off the carriage, the umbrella tilting under the heavy rain, the cold seeping into my bones. I hugged her gently, as if I were embracing Victoria from years ago across time and space. I whispered, "The mountains are high and the road is long. Take care of yourself." The sound of the rain faded away, and I could hear her passionate heartbeat under the cold rain. 18-year-old Victoria, 25-year-old Victoria, the road is long. The director called cut at this moment. I was still holding Victoria when the assistant hurriedly came over with an umbrella to shield us from the rain. I saw her wet bangs, and beneath them her eyes were bright and stubborn. My thoughts returned to reality and I let go of her. My trembling hand brushed against her hot skin just as I released her. In the dressing room, after changing my clothes, I bumped into Sophia. She handed me a cup of warm ginger tea outside. I was momentarily stunned. She pursed her lips and said, "I made this for you to ward off the cold." I thanked her and took it, sipping it lightly because I never liked the taste of ginger. Sophia was beautiful, somewhat resembling the ideal woman. Someone had once made a mashup video pairing her and Victoria, which gained some popularity for a while. Thinking of that video made me want to laugh. Sophia raised an eyebrow and asked, "What's so funny?" I shook my head, suppressing my smile, and said, "Just thought of something amusing." Sophia didn't press further. She smiled and said, "It's impressive how you got so into your role for your first time acting, Mr. S." Listening to her, I relaxed a bit. I had been worried that my performance would drag down the quality of this primetime show. I thought to myself, the reason I got into character was that I saw Victoria in the rain. She didn't have any lines, but every gesture conveyed heartache. I was still thinking about the unfinished sentence Ethan had said. Who wanted me to play such a role? Was it Victoria? But why? Having been in the rain and then drinking some hot tea, my mind felt a bit sluggish. Just as I was about to speak, I saw Victoria's figure. She was carrying a cup of something, her face not looking too well, her lips still pale. She naturally took the ginger tea I had only taken a couple of sips from and handed me the thermos she was holding, saying, "Don't you dislike ginger the most? Why drink so much if you don't like it? This is a soup Auntie's son made for you." Her familiarity was evident, but her gaze was unfriendly. After saying this, she pouted, looking aggrieved, and said, "Miss Sophie has something to do." Sophia pursed her lips and smiled, glancing at me as she said, "Since you two have something to discuss, I'll take my leave." Watching Sophia walk away, I said helplessly, "Weren't we supposed to pretend we didn't know each other?" Victoria snorted coldly, her voice clearly aggrieved as she said, "Sincere, you pretend not to know me, but with her, you force yourself to drink ginger tea you don't like and have a lively chat. You're so mean." I keenly sensed her hostility towards Sophia and asked, "Did something happen between you two?" Victoria was silent for a moment, then turned her eyes away and said awkwardly, "No, not really. It's just my one-sided grudge." "All right, Miss Victoria." During a break on set, I passed by Sophia. She was watching the latest episode of the drama on her tablet, just when Melody first met Phoenix. The scene paused at the moment when the guard embraced Melody in the pouring rain. The rain rolled down her face almost like tears. Victoria's face was truly a masterpiece, stunning from every angle. Sophia took off her headphones and called me over, pointing to the empty seat next to her. I instinctively scanned the surroundings. Sophia chuckled, "Don't worry, she's not here." Sophia smiled gently. She had a graceful demeanor, playing the role of the Prime Minister's daughter in the drama, and being an intellectual goddess outside of it. Her smile felt like a warm spring flowing gently. She spoke in a low voice. "She seems to have a lot of hostility towards me." I shook my head. "I don't know the reason either." Sophia lifted the tablet and I curiously leaned over to watch. Seeing myself on the screen felt quite novel. I said, "I didn't expect it to air so soon." Sophia nodded and said, "No one expected Victoria to want to play Melody." In that instant, my enthusiasm was suddenly dampened. I withdrew my gaze and replied, "Yes." I thought, who would have thought such a proud person as her would go to such lengths for Ethan? Looking at the bustling crew and countless cameras surrounding Victoria, I couldn't help but think. Victoria and Ethan were rehearsing a scene together. There were too many people in the way, so I couldn't see clearly. Sophia followed my gaze and looked over. I chuckled and said, "She's acting because of Ethan." Sophia suddenly paused, her elegant fingers lightly tracing the small table. After a long moment, she chuckled softly and said, "Sincere, you really are oblivious." I turned around. Sophia said, "You can't possibly be unaware that Victoria treats you differently, can you? Just like a long time ago in college, when the whole campus knew I liked you except for you." I was stunned by Sophia's sudden revelation. I didn't know how to respond. She laughed lightly, clearly untroubled. That was years ago. I suddenly remembered something Ethan had said. Someone who's not even a supporting character can't affect the plot. I shook my head. She wasn't like that before. Now, I paused. She's just used to having me around. She doesn't want me to leave. Sophia patiently replied, as if guiding a younger, clueless student. "A lot of people want to get close to Victoria. Why does she only want to stay by your side? Sincere, you should think about this carefully." I couldn't find an answer. Sophia changed the subject. "Have you watched the show? The reviews are great." I was still in a daze when the filming ended. Victoria walked towards us, her figure bathed in the golden light. Her almond-shaped eyes were half closed, and she glanced at me and Sophia with a cool indifference. The director was very pleased with the footage and beamed as he saw Sophia and me. He seemed to recall a joke from our school days and cheerfully recited, "Sincere towering over the clouds with Sophia protecting the peak." I was speechless. Sophia was speechless. Victoria was speechless. She shot a resentful glance at the director, forcing him to swallow the rest of his teasing words. Victoria seemed rather uninterested and turned to leave in a different direction. Sophia tilted her chin at me and asked, "Well, aren't you going to comfort her?" I watched Victoria's retreating figure, feeling a bit powerless. I shook my head and said, "Forget it, I'm tired." Actually, the rest of the plot hadn't changed much. The show was being filmed and aired simultaneously. The current filming progress was at the part where Phoenix was about to ascend to the throne after intense struggles. Only the first episode had aired online. I only watched the finished episode online. It gained a lot of attention early on because Victoria had scenes in the first episode. I turned off the barrage of comments to focus on the show. The beginning was a summary of Phoenix's daily life and background. At the end of the episode, there was a heavy rain scene. I was lost in thought for a long time before reopening the comments. Most comments were sympathizing with Melody, saying things like, "How can Vicky be in the mud? To one hug, she got one hug. And is this a secondary couple? Victoria's acting is incredible." I was watching in the break room with my tablet. Just as I finished, a voice coldly interrupted. Ethan stood in front of me, having probably seen the comments I had just read. His assistant, in a sharp tone, said, "This was supposed to be Eth's scene." His tone was mocking and unpleasant. Ethan smiled at his assistant and said, "It doesn't matter, it's just a few lines for a small supporting role. It's only because Victoria's popularity is high that more people are shipping them. They're just brainless fans." I coldly replied, "Interesting. When we were discussing the script and lines, you were there. If you had any objections, why didn't you raise them then? Why come to me now?" Ethan probably didn't expect me to retort, and his smile faltered. His discontent brought me a bit of satisfaction. His assistant's voice cut in again. "Let him enjoy his moment. Soon Victoria will have a new song and a music video with Eth as the male lead. Who cares about this bit of popularity?" I paused in my packing, remembering that this was indeed the plan. According to the original plot, Victoria would have a new song, and the male lead in the music video was supposed to be Ethan. I rubbed my temples. It was fine. Everything was developing according to the original plot. I would naturally step back without hesitation. On set, Ethan and Victoria barely interacted, but who could know the deep feelings nurtured over the years? However, in the next moment, a playful voice rang out. A girl chuckled, half leaning against the doorframe. Her almond-shaped eyes were full of emotion when she smiled, but when she wasn't smiling, they were as cold as they were now, chilling to the bone. Victoria frowned and said each word clearly. "Who said that?" Ethan and his assistant turned to look, their faces paling. Victoria continued, "Why don't I know that I have a new song?" Ethan called out, "Vicky." Victoria lifted her eyelids, rolling her eyes. Her voice was icy. "Are we that close?" I looked at Victoria, then at Ethan. Victoria suddenly looked at me, her almond eyes smiling, dispelling the cold wind. Blossoms seemed to flutter down around us. She reached out her hand. "Sin, aren't you coming over?" She made me wait outside for a moment. After about a minute, she came out. I didn't hear clearly what she said, but she said it was nothing. Victoria huffed, "If you won't come to comfort me, I'll have to come to you. You've changed, Sincere. If someone mocked you like this before, you would have hit them. What happened to you now?" I suddenly realized that Victoria actually. However, I hoped I could teach Ethan a lesson. A hint of joy emerged, but I still probed. "Is he Ethan?" Victoria approached me, her scent like freshly fallen snow. She asked, "What about Ethan?" I was at a loss. How could I say it? I couldn't possibly tell her. "Ethan is the one you were affectionate with at your press conference. He is the one you were willing to give everything for. He is the protagonist of your life script." In the end, I just whispered, "He is your protagonist." Victoria was stunned, looking into my eyes. Slowly, she said, "He is not." She stepped closer, her red lips pressed tightly. She said, "Sincere, you asked me if I was accustomed to having you by my side. I said it was never a habit. But I also want to ask you, all these years you've been with me, was it just out of pity? You didn't ask about the press conference. You didn't ask why I wanted you to play the role of Alex. You acted like a noble person, giving a bit of light to someone in the abyss. When she finally climbs out, you leave without a word." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, one drop hanging on her lower lashes, like a goddess suddenly showing vulnerability. She suddenly reached out and lightly hugged me, as soft as a feather, yet full of the scent of snow. Victoria softly said, "You should go." For some reason, my eyes felt sore. Controlling my emotions, I said word by word, "Victoria, but what if life is a script? Whether it's me, you, Ethan, or Sophia, we're all just characters in the script. Maybe destiny was predetermined from the start. She interrupted. My life is not something a script can decide. Please believe me, even if it were a script, I would rewrite it. Victoria indeed could rewrite the script. At least she managed to do so in this series. She relied on that first scene of a hug in the rain and a series of performances afterward. Without added lines or changed scenes, she made the audience imagine a deep, complicated relationship with Alex. Still on set, I sat beside the monitor. Victoria was browsing her phone, her eyebrows curved in a joyful expression. I looked at her several times before she lazily glanced at me, arrogantly asking, "What?" I turned my head, saying, "Nothing." She then brought her phone to my face. It was the comments from fans about Alex and Melody. I looked at the screen full of exclamations, feeling a headache, but still smiled slightly. She turned her head slightly, showing a perfect side profile of a goddess. I brought up the time she spoke lines to Ethan at the press conference. Victoria pouted, saying, "Now you finally want to ask me." She pursed her lips, seriously saying, "I actually wanted to test the fans' reaction to my relationship." Victoria turned to look at me seriously, saying, "I felt a long time ago that Ethan's presence was very important to you. If you thought I was deeply in love with him, you should have come to understand yourself, rather than choosing to leave." The voices around faded away. I suddenly realized that this world was not like cold paper being opened, and everyone's fate was not predetermined. I was not a supporting character in someone else's life. I was the master of my own life. If I wasn't even willing to reach out, how could I say I truly loved her? After the airing of My Emperor's Order, the ratings were extremely high, and the reviews were great. After work ended, I decided to return to San Francisco. As I packed my luggage, Sophia came to my door to see me off. She said some polite words, then leaned against the door, saying, "Actually, I saw Victoria a long time ago." I waited curiously for her to continue. With a bit of apology in her eyes, she said, "It was during our university's anniversary celebration. After the event, we went to eat. That time, a lot of people were jeering for us to be together and reciting some poem they found. Victoria came that day. She looked at me from a distance for a while and then left. Her gaze was so sad. After she left, I realized she came to find you, but she didn't speak to you in the end." I suddenly recalled the 20-year-old Victoria. Once she stood under a street lamp trying to put on gloves, but her body was shaking so much she couldn't. She frowned, stepped back half a step, slowly hugged her knees, and with a trembling voice asked if I pitied her. Only now do I realize she had come looking for me. Victoria wasn't on set today. I received her message after boarding the train. She sent a question mark, and I saw typing for a long time before she finally sent 4 words, "Take care on the road." After a while, she sent 2 more words, "Wait for me." I replied, "Okay." The first thing I did when I got home was to eat at the old dumpling shop downstairs. I had become familiar with the boss. He smiled and asked, "Why didn't you bring your girlfriend to eat?" I asked, "My girlfriend?" He said, "Yes, that pretty girl who often came here to eat after you went to college." I bit into the dumpling, the thin skin and rich filling. The shop was playing a song, one of Victoria's recent songs, "You Are My Silent Reliance," yet I never felt anything different. I crown my all for you, without you knowing this heartfelt intention doesn't burden you. I suddenly realized that perhaps all these years I wasn't the only one following her. My Emperor's Order continued to be popular, airing 2 episodes a week, but I wasn't quite satisfied. At dusk, I went for a walk and saw a large LED screen hanging on a building. A week later, Victoria's concert would be held in New York City. The phone rang, and I picked it up without thinking. There was a long silence on the other end. I looked up at the LED screen. Victoria's half-closed eyes on the huge poster exuded a detached allure. The lighting was impeccable, making it hard to look away. At the very top, the words "Northern Lights" were displayed. After a long pause, she finally called out, "Sincere." I smiled and said, "Congratulations on wrapping up your shoot, Victoria." I thought for a moment and added, "Ethan knows that Melody likes him." After hanging up, I thought about how Victoria, ever since her debut, had always kept her personal information tightly under wraps. Despite her high profile, she remained low-key, never appearing on variety shows. However, a video suddenly surfaced. It was a clip from my university's anniversary celebration. She was at the edge of the crowd and the camera briefly caught her. The video quality was not great, but her eyes were fixed on the stage, her expression rare and relaxed, tired yet affectionate. The clip was only a few seconds long but caused a significant stir. Fans began dissecting the video, almost tracing it back to me. Victoria's almost dormant social media account finally posted a message. "Shh, don't mention it." Fans seemed to understand something and uniformly fell silent, as if the whole world was cooperating with her. Some of Victoria's older videos were dug up, showing her being sidelined in roles or targeted by her teammates. People were shocked to realize that this girl, who once had dim eyes and was down and out, had struggled for so many years. Who picked her up and dusted her off? Who supported her shoulders and set her straight? When Victoria's concert began, I bought a ticket and entered the venue with her fans. The place was filled with light signs. I blended into the crowd, listening to them sing along to her songs, their love for her palpable. The venue went dark, with only Victoria shining brightly on stage. It was the first time I heard her sing Northern Lights in its entirety. From the Northern Lights diving into the polar night, embracing her 18-year-old self, to the moment she crowned it all for you, the audience listened in complete silence. She was like that famous photo of hers, one side of her face lit up, the other half in shadow. She should have been as cold and unfeeling as a deity, but as she played the piano, her eyes were filled with tenderness. That night the goddess fell, half resplendent, half silent. She was the most dazzling light in the room, distant yet moving. But as she sang her Northern Lights, the entire venue was quiet, deeply moved by her emotion. Suddenly, Victoria broke the silence with a laugh. "I'm sorry," she said. "At the recent press conference for our emperor, I lied to everyone. My favorite line isn't that long speech." With a smile, she continued, "I only told the truth about one thing. I hope my name and his will be remembered together." The audience was stunned by the information. Firstly, she denied any romantic possibility with Ethan. Secondly, she indeed had someone special in mind. The venue buzzed like boiling water. Victoria scanned the crowd and looked in my direction. Despite knowing she couldn't possibly see me, I instinctively responded to her gaze. She continued, "He is my Northern Lights. He once asked me if I would fall in love with anyone who approached me during my toughest times." She answered firmly, lifting her head slightly amidst the silent crowd, starlight flickering in her eyes like unshed tears, and she looked directly at me. "No. Besides you, no one can approach me. It has to be you. It must be you. Thank you for being my Northern Lights. From 18 to 25, you are my favorite. I only love you." She shared her light with me. Victoria paused for a long time, and the audience almost believed her special someone was present. But Victoria turned away, saying, "Thank you all for being here, but please don't probe too much into who he is. I don't want my feelings to burden him in any way." Finally, she recited, "When sincerity ascends to the clouds, the mist becomes like smoke." The venue was silent for a moment before erupting in cheers. Her unburdening love climbed to the top of the trending charts. That night, the wonton shop was still open. As I entered, I saw 2 stems of gentian on the table. The boss saw me and smiled. "Young man, your girlfriend just left. She placed those flowers there." Surprised, I raised an eyebrow but kept my composure, slowly finishing my bowl of wontons. After paying, I took one of the gentian stems. The sky was darkening in New York City, the night air cool by the seaside. The streets were empty, and the sea breeze ruffled my clothes, but I felt at peace. I thought, walking slowly, I would eventually meet her. After all these years, a little more time wouldn't matter. I walked to the beach. The evening breeze was gentle. With a sigh, I turned around. Victoria was walking towards me, carrying 2 cans of beer. She wore a white dress and, with no one around, had removed anything hiding her face. She walked quickly, the crescent moon over New York City shining brightly behind her. My emotions surged like the tide, yet remained as calm as the sea. It felt like I had waited for this moment for years. Taking a deep breath, the breeze whispering past my ear, and the starlight sweeping across the clouds, I handed her the gentian. Turning back time just to meet her, I said, "Victoria, I like you. I've always liked you." She collected her composure, looked at me seriously, and a touch of red climbed up her ears like time stood still. The light rewinds back to her at 18. Cautious yet joyous, she nods with delight and whispers softly, "I like you too." Her hand slips into mine, warm and dry, like a hidden spring blooming. I lower my head and plant a kiss on her lips, cool like moonlight. Years of affection finally fulfilled. I once thought I was just a supporting character in a book, but didn't realize someone had quietly placed me in her heart year after year. You must be someone's northern lights too.